time.
All the time. All right, so I trust this morning we come with a spirit of expectation.
Yes.
Not from me necessarily, but from God, that God is going to do something new. He's going to bless us in a mighty way. Amen.
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 So this morning, I want to, we know that the Easter season is coming. We have a lot of focus on the cross, and we're going to be convergent, if I want to use that word, on the cross. So over the next weeks, I'm preaching this week and next week, I wanted to bring some messages that I have really been compiled in a book. And the book is called Cross Reference, the Cross Conversations. So I just called these messages that came out of it, that the Lord gave me these messages to bless us. And it has blessed me. I hope the book will actually come. I know I'm a little hesitant with books. In the first book, had some issues, but I trust this morning that you'll be truly blessed. So the title of the message is The Crowd, the Cross, and I.
Ooh, amen.
The crowd, the cross, and I. And basically, we always have, from where we sit now, I should say, a hindsight or what took place. But this morning, I want to place myself in that crowd, leading before the activities leading up from the pavement or the praetorium where the tribunal was taking place to the cross.
Wow.
And there was a crowd.
Yeah.
There was a crowd. There was a cross. But I placed myself, and this morning the Lord wants to place yourself in the midst of the crowd. Because it has relevance, and that's what the book is about. That we can reference things and conversations of the cross that led up to the cross. And in looking at those conversations, we realize that, if we are in it, we can better understand. But the people who were there at the time, they didn't have hindsight. They didn't know that 3 days later there was going to be a resurrection. They didn't know a lot of things, but they only knew for that time.
Right.
But there were some decisions to make. And it had to work through the crowd, what was happening there, had to work through the cross that was before them and come to their personal decisions. So that's where the I comes in. And the Lord took me into the midst of that cross. And this morning, there are so many, all the Gospels speak of this particular message. So we can't run through all the scriptures, but I'll just pull from them. But Matthew 27, we show verses 1 to 5, and then we can go from 12 to 31. Luke and John, I will just, when I give examples, I'll just pull from those scriptures. So if we just turn to in the Bibles, we could look at Matthew 27, verses 1 to 5, and then we'll jump from 12 to 31. I'm not going to be for a little time here, so I'll try to, get through as quickly. I'll try not to go too much to my notes, but I'll try to use the introduction and the outline of the message here. So if you could go to the scripture of Matthew chapter 27 and verse 1 to 5. So as I was saying in the message, it's the cross reference, the cross conversations. If you could just keep the first page highlighted still before we go to the introduction. And then try, and you can bring up the scriptures of Matthew 27 if we have it. If anyone wants to read, have to read in the first verses 1 to 5 while we're still trying to find it. Verses 1 to 5 of Matthew 27.
Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw what Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood.
Okay.
What is that?
That's 5.
Keep going?
No, keep going.
Yeah.
One.
What is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself.
All right, then, verses 12 to 31.
When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with the innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him."
Yes.
But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again.
Okay, let's just bow hearts in prayer. Father, we thank you for the reading of your word and the understanding. We pray, mighty God, as we delve into this topic, oh God, that as we bring this message and crystallize our thoughts, that our minds, oh God, will be clear, that we will understand all the context of what you want to bring to us this morning. Hide self behind the cross, that only you and you alone be glorified. So, I am in this crowd on the pavement, big crowd, and they have just come from where, a little before that, they were where Peter was, and he denied Jesus 3 times. The council, they were having their meeting and coming up with all their plans and how they were to bring a case against Jesus. And the crowd was now moving towards the pavement in the area of the praetorium. And I was in that crowd. I was excited because I wanted to know what was going on. As a young 18-year-old at that time, I'm in the crowd, and people are, you hear these loud voices, and people are shouting all kinds of things. And as I looked at the crowd, I wanted to come close to understand some of the conversations that were taking place on that day. And there were many conversations taking place. And there were about 3 different divergent mindsets of views that came out of that cross. So the crowd, the cross, and I, we got to contemplate the cross this morning. And we need to look at these 3. The crowd, the cross, and I. Amen. Look at yourself this morning in the midst of that crowd. But you're going to see through the sharing of this message, there are going to be some other 3 things that we need to look at. So as we go to the other slide, we skip down past the introduction, we're going to see the first set of persons that had a particular mindset and view. And these were the people who were the condemning and the condescending. And look at these 3. So we're going to see another 3 here. And I'm going to look this morning at the high priest. We're going to look at the scribes and the soldiers. And these who were putting together a plan. And beyond the plan, they were moving in a particular direction where they wanted to ensure that Jesus was crucified. Their plan was to take him out. whatever else, they had to find the means necessary. And they decided to bring him to the governor. So they are in this place of the tribunal, and I am listening to what is taking place. And I was seeing these persons, these three, in all different fashions. Some were mocking him. They brought false accusations against him. They treated Jesus with contempt, and they spewed contempt at him. They plotted, and they used their positions. The high priest, they had powers of persuasion, if I would call that, and they were persuading the crowd. They were ramping them up, riling them up, to cast certain aspersions and to bring this before the governor Pilate, because they wanted a guilty charge against him. Most of it, though, was out of envy. They were envious. That was the reason, because Jesus was getting all these people following. His name was being bandied about, if I want to use that term, of the whole area. People were aware of this Jesus, and they seem to have been diminishing in importance, and they did not like that. They did not like that. Jesus was keeping silent. I was in the crowd and I wanted to hear Jesus, and I said, Jesus, say something, say something. But Jesus wasn't saying anything. He just kept quiet as they asked him certain questions of him. They may have asked him, and he gave some little one answer. He said, are you the king of the Jews? He said, you said it. You said it. And I'm saying, Jesus, say something more. But he was remaining quiet at everything they were accusing him of. I listened to the conversations in an effort to determine my own position as I contemplated the cross. So the high priest was keeping before him. They were making noise, ramping up the crowd, and Jesus was silent. They brought him out of the praetorium, and they brought him into the hallway, where one slapped him on his face, one of the soldiers. And they continued to mock him. And to me, I'm seeing this crowd as being very condemning of Jesus. And that's what the conversations that were taking place, because the voices of that particular crowd were very loud. They were going to be above everyone else, and that was the only voice I was hearing. The voice of the crowd that was shouting, crucify him, that were mocking him, that wanted to kill, that wanted to hurt, and that was their only intent. But then I realized that there were some other things that we needed to see at that point. And I was privy to some of the things that not all the crowd was, but I found myself in places where I could get some of the conversation. And I found another viewpoint. And this was the people who were convicted and conflicted. And we're going to look at these three. There was Judas. And if we look into the first, I think the first 5 verses we read of Judas. Judas saw how Jesus was being condemned. And he began to have strong convictions. He became very conflicted. Meaning that he was someone who is conflicted is between two opinions. They're not sure of if they believe or if they don't believe. And if, this is true or not true, they were just, in a tailspin. They don't know where to turn because they're hearing the voices of the crowd. But he knew what he had experienced with Jesus because he was a disciple of Jesus. So he was hearing these two opposing things about this Jesus he knew. But he felt bad because he was the one who brought his Jesus to this place. So he was very conflicted. And the very 30 pieces of silver that he got for Jesus, he's almost conflicted. He brought it back. Yeah. He brought it back. And even the state of mind he was in even went beyond that he went out and he hung himself. He was convicted and conflicted. Then I look at the Pilates. That is Mr. Pontius himself and his wife. So I got up close to the judgment seat, and I saw he got a little note while he was sitting in the judgment seat. And it was from Mrs. Pilate. Mrs. Pilate seemed that she was also convicted and conflicted. She said, don't have anything to do with that just man.
Yes.
Don't have anything to do with that just man. She said, whole morning, whole night is a dream. I'm dreaming. She said, and if we look at Miss Pilate as she was, being having privy, she said nothing to do with him. I have suffered many things today. That is exactly what she said. I have suffered many things today because of him in a dream. Because of who? Jesus. When you have an experience, when Jesus is coming into your space, there's something that brings a sense of conviction. There's something that wants to draw you, something that's saying that I need to do something with this Jesus in front of me. Do I believe him? Do I receive him? Or do I reject him? The crowd was making noise and they wanted to reject Jesus. They were rejecting him and discrediting him. They were spewing contempt on him. But some of them in the crowd were being convicted. Some who were even the ones who had to make a judgment on him were being convicted. Side Pilate on the judgment seat, and there was strong conviction. Here Pilate, in John 7 and 8, he was afraid because of what he heard, because somebody said, this is the Son of God. In Matthew 27 and 24, Pilate, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. We just heard his wife say, a just man. He's saying he's a just person. Pilate washed his hands. Not just like this, he said, well, I washed my hands from that. He literally took water and washed his hands. He didn't want Jesus' blood upon him at all. He was so conflicted by convictions that came upon him because of this just man.
Right.
He said, I find no fault in him. He didn't say it once, but 3 times. He went back and forth with the crowd, and he said, I find no fault with this man. And these things began speaking to me because I have to make a decision. I am in this crowd. You are in this crowd, and you have to make a decision, and you're hearing these things, and you're hearing some of the leaders, the governor himself, being a bit convicted and conflicted with what decision I have to make. But when you come to the cross, you have to make a decision. You cannot just walk away from it. I find no fault. Then I realized, as I move away from Pilate, as they're trying to get him to release Barabbas, because they're having a feast. It's a feast day when you have to release somebody. You have a choice to make. In life we have choices to make. But our choices, what they are based on, is it an envy, is it a fact, is it an experience that we have? How are we making our decisions? Or are we listening to the crowd? Are we listening to the crowd? Chief priests, the scribes, they wanted to change what was inscribed in how much languages? 3 different languages above his head. It was in Greek, it was in Latin, it was in Hebrew. So there were 3 languages. Everyone could have been clear. And he said, this is the King of the Jews. The Pharisees and the scribes, and they say, no. He said he is the King of the Jews. Pilate so convicted and confused. Say, what I have written. I have written.
Right.
Don't try to change what I am, what is coming into my system right now, what I am feeling, what I'm sensing. And sometimes, you're at that place of conviction. You want to come to that place of conversion, but someone is trying to wheel you back and push you back to where you came from. But you said, what is written? What I have written? I have written. And he said, I leave it at that. Then thirdly, we see Mr. Herod. So when Pilate find out that Jesus is a Galilean, he said, well, I don't have to deal with this. Send him down to Herod. Everybody trying to get away from making that decision. And sometimes we're always trying to get away from making the decision, but it's a decision that has to be made. So Herod was so happened to be in Jerusalem. So the crowd was able to move down to where Herod was, and we started to hear some more things that was happening with Herod. This Herod was saying that, Lord, I want to see this Jesus. Herod had heard about this Jesus, so even Herod wanted to have an audience with Jesus. So he was glad he was in the right place at the right time to hear about this Jesus. He was hoping that Jesus was coming to perform some kind of miracles in front of him, because he had been hearing that the man is doing stuff. The man is doing some serious stuff.
Right.
People are experiencing the manifestation of his power and his authority when he speaks, when he moves with the signs and wonders and miracles. And he was excited to see Jesus. But though he was impacted by what he heard, he still remained conflicted. He sent him back to Pontius Pilate. Later on, just before Barabbas was released, Pilate said, neither does Herod find fault in him. Pilate and Herod were enemies kind of way, But that day, they came to a place and they became best friends. They became very good friends. So sometimes Jesus can bring healing, just the presence of Jesus. When there's enmity between people, just how they understand who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And when you start to work in your system,
Right.
all those barriers and all those walls are being broken down. So it had these who were condemning and condescending, had those who were convicted and conflicted. So a lot of different people in this crowd, But then there's another three that I started to get some conversations. And those three were those who were convinced, they were consolidated, they were convicted, and converted. So I looked at these three. I looked at the followers. Because now they said crucify him. And that was the final thing and the final judgment, because they wanted the Barabbas. He released Barabbas and he said, okay, you all take Jesus. And they started to move towards Golgotha Hill. The crowd. I jumped in the crowd and I excited to get up to Golgotha Hill because I wanted to know what else, what other conversations are going to happen there. And I see, Simon, they call him out and he carrying the cross and he's going up and all the ladies were following. So I realized from since in the pavement, in the hall, outside the Praetorium Hall, it had some ladies, but they weren't loud. Some other men, but one of the ladies, some of them were lamenting, some were crying. But I realized that Jesus had some followers, and they were following him. And as they were following, I got close by them because I wanted to know what some of the conversations were going on. And they were weeping and lamenting. And why Jesus said, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and your children. Weep for yourselves and weep for your children. I am telling you, Jesus was bearing our judgment on that day. He said, don't weep for me. I was called to do this work, basically, is what he was telling them. But yes, I'm going to be a judgment that's going to come, that is going to cause weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And if you don't set things right and do something with me, there's going to be weeping. So don't weep for me. Weep for those who might be the convicted and the conflicted, but not the converted.
That's right.
We need to weep. And you need to weep when you have family members and friends and loved ones who are not yet convicted or converted. You need to weep for them. You need to wail for them. You need to pray for them into the kingdom. I'm telling you, there was reason. And when I heard that, I jumped back. And the ladies were quiet. And like they were starting to ponder on what Jesus was saying. But we continued our walk up to Golgotha. So I realized that beside the crowd that was making all this noise, there were other people who had a different perspective and were impacted differently by the cross. Were impacted differently by all the events leading up to the cross. These ladies, I realized they were so strong. I said, these were definitely people who were discipled by Jesus, these followers. They were consolidated. Nothing couldn't move them or shift them from the base, from the foundation on which they were standing on. It was a solid foundation. Amen. And sometimes we allow the crowd to cause us to shift from our base and our foundation. But if we have a firm foundation anchored in Jesus, nothing they could say is going to shift us. Amen. We must remain consolidated because we are convinced of who Jesus is and who he said he is. If you are convinced this morning, and you know why they were convinced? Because they had the experience. A lot of people want to speak and they don't have the experience. They don't have the experience. But the man without the experience is always at the mercy of that person who have had that experience. Amen. So I saw those who followed him afar off, especially women who mourned, and they were convinced. They were convinced. And then, as we got up Golgotha Hill and they put up the cross, there were three. There were three. And we looked at the cross and we could hear the thieves speaking. One remained condemning and condescending. But there was another thief who was convicted and he got converted. One of the thieves got convicted and converted. How do that know that? Because he said, Jesus, don't forget me. Don't forget me. And somebody here this morning might need to say, Jesus, don't forget me. And he said, Jesus responded to him. He said, today you will be with me in paradise. Those who are convicted and converted will find themselves with Jesus in paradise. Amen. That's the sure place that we are confident we are going to go because we have had the experience. And then thirdly, there was the centurion. So when Jesus gave that last breath and he gave up the ghost, Mr. Centurion, he started shaky, trembling, because a lot of things was happening. Earthquake, veil rent in twain, tombs opening up. Mr. Centurion, he started understanding. They don't start to understand, but all the time they want to be condescending, they want to slap on the. But he and some of the other guys, they will have to be close to God, Jesus. And they said, a confession. Surely. That I think, surely this was the Son of God. So, I don't know how you are convicted and how convinced you are. And if you are sure this morning that Jesus is truly the Son of God. I said, what a confession. Because I was now kind of getting like-minded because of my personal encounter that day at Calvary. That happened just before Jesus died. So, instead of the cross, I heard just before Jesus died, he was looking down from the cross. He had a view of everything down there. And I said, then there was three. Jesus. And he looked at his mother and he said, Mother, your son. And he looked at John and he said, John, your mother. And from that day there was a difference. Jesus was looking after the disciple who he loved. And knowing that the disciple who loved him was going to take care of his mother. Yes. And I said that amazing. And as I was looking up, just at that point, like I went into, was I seeing a vision? And Jesus said, you look towards the cross. And I looked at the cross. He said, what do you see? And I took a closer look. And this is where, my wife had a little hesitancy in me preaching this morning. But then the Lord, it's about a year and a half I wanted to preach this message. He said, sure, you will have preached that. but the Lord said to me, coming up this week, he said, that is how I give you it. You just deliver it.
Amen. That's right.
And I had a vision. And he said, this is not for you alone, but for all of us, because this is about the crown, the cross, and I. And all of us are I, because all of us are in the crowd. All of us are in the crowd of life, and we have to make a decision. But what do you see? And then I realized it's not for me. I heard one say, what does the cross represent? And I heard some say, amazing love. I heard some say, it's about sacrifice. Some says it represents the cure, the cost, and the cure of sin. But that's not what I was not seeing that. Jesus said, what do you see? And that's when I didn't see the cross like this. What letters that look like in the alphabet?
T.
Yeah. But I saw it like this.
Gosh, she's
What
sweating.
letter is that? Y. And I said, why Lord? And he said, because the cross is a place of conversion and a place of diversion. It's a fork in the road. And he said, don't look just at me. Look at us three. And I said, I thought he talked about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but then the Holy Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified. So I said, but three? And he said, there are two other crosses. Yeah. One to my right and one to my left. So I said, what is the message there? And he said, conversion and diversion. So I was trying to understand the message. And he said, two thieves
I'm sweating.
and Jesus at the center. The two thieves came from the same place, from one place here at the bottom of the Y. But after coming to the cross, they left at the top of the Y. One went in this direction and one went the other. So it was a place of diversion for them. They came as thieves. They came probably as friends from the prison cell. But when they encountered Jesus, there was a different impact.
Yes, amen.
One left,
Yes.
going to a place of fire and torment. And one was going to be in paradise in Jesus. And then I saw the Y again. And Jesus says, that's me and you. We come from two different places. You come from that place of sin, and I came without sin. But I came to take your sin away. And as I saw that thief confess, and Jesus said, today you're with me in paradise. I saw myself and Jesus coming together and living as one, because we were to be the same. And Jesus said, that is the message of the cross. When we converge on the cross, it's a place of decision making. It's a place of conversion, or it's a place of diversion. So the cross at that day was no longer a T, but it was a Y. And that was the vision of the cross. So as I saw that cross that day and converged on it, I'm saying the cross confronts us all. It's a place of decision. And how it impacts us, or by whom we allow the decisions, our decisions to be influence, will determine our destiny. It will determine our destiny. Two guys from the same place left different. Two guys from a different place left and went to the same place in paradise. As I bring message to close today, it's the conclusion of my message. I call it the cross confrontation, conversion, or diversion. And he spoke about another three. And I was trying to understand what that three is about. And he said, remember these three things, the three different viewpoints we saw. So remember those three in your decision making. But for those of us who didn't have the foresight, remember there are 3 days. There's a third day to come. So it didn't end on Friday. So we must remember the death, the burial, and the resurrection. Remember those 3. Because without the resurrection, the story is not completed. But as I look at Luke 23, 48 and 49, somewhere there, the crowd that had come to Calvary to behold him name. And I saw, if I wanted to read, I hope I have the right place. I was making so much notes, but I believe it's in Luke 40 to 56. But we are speaking here of when the people were going to leave Calvary, they were going to return. He said, look at 3 sets of people, or 3 mindsets, or 3 how people were impacted. But because they said the people returned. Am I in the right way?
Yes.
The people were returning, they returned. And as they were returning, I think it was speaking that what that suggests to you, somebody's beating their breast and shaking head. To me, I realized that some people in the crowd who came to the cross was now leaving a sense of regret. They were convicted. They felt that, I think, we made a mistake today. We did something wrong. There was a feeling of uneasiness in their lives, and probably for some shame. Sometimes it's a sign of anger when we beat our breasts, that we are upset. Sorrow, repentance sometimes is being suggested. But they beat their breasts. What will I be doing when I'm returning from Calvary? And as I was leaving with those who were returning and I was watching them, I turned back. And then I saw the second set of group of people, the followers. They remained. And they were still lamenting. And they were wondering, there was a togetherness that they were not shaken, but they seemed to be more together and convinced of what they saw. Because they were talking about the people, I think the language they use, they say the sight, what they saw. So they came to the sight and had a sight. And we need to have that sight of the cross and everything else that happened with it. And they went to the tomb, I believe. I need to get that piece of scripture. I think we need to read it in its entirety, because it got a bit powerful and overwhelming, but it was just what the Lord was saying that, we do. So if it's Luke 23.
Okay, have it up.
Let's see if I can get it quickly before we conclude here. Says.
Pasta.
Okay.
You want it from 48?
48.
Yeah, you're going to find it. You see.
Verse 48.
Alright, it says that all the people that came together to that site, not you realize it's not S-I-T, right? S-I-G-H-T. Yeah, that's right. Beholding the things that were done, smote their breasts and returned. And all his acquaintances, so the other people were acquaintances, Jesus' acquaintances, they knew him, they were his friends that came together, beholding the things. Those acquaintances followed from Galilee, stood afar off, beholding the things. Everyone was beholding the things before them. And behold, there was a man. So beholding now, there was a man, Joseph of Arimathea. Now, why Joseph comes now? Because there's the big crowd. All of us are part of the big crowd, but yet there's a separate, small crowd of followers and acquaintances who had a different and was living with a different perspective. And then Joseph represents the I. You know why? Because Joseph was part of that council of Sanhedrin who would have been making that decision to crucify Jesus and who was riding up the crowd. But Joseph, being a just man, separated himself from that crowd and from that decision. And he returned, but he returned for the body of Jesus. Because he was a just man and he understood who Jesus was. Sometimes because we are part of a group, sometimes we are part of something. And we want to please and we want to be part of the crowd. But they say Joseph of Arimathea did not consent to the decision of that council. You do not have to consent to the crowd. If you know it's against God's teaching, it's against God's perspective, it's against Jesus. Do not consent. Under pressure, do not consent. And as that rang in me, I said, I have to move myself away from the crowd. And I want to attach myself to Jesus. I want to probably get myself with those who are continuing to follow him. And this morning, you and I, we are faced with that decision. As it came down, they said that it was a day of preparation at the Sabbath road, and the women also which came with him from Galilee, they followed after him. So I went to that crowd that was following after him. Are you following after him? Were you in that crowd, or are you going back with the crowd, only just beating your chest and shaking your head? Which part of that crowd were you? The crowd, the cross, and I. And the woman also which came with him from Galilee followed after him, and we held the sepulchre and how his body was laid and they returned. This morning, we are all confronted by the cross. And there are things that we need to see. On that Good Friday, many of the crowd whose conversation I heard did not have the hindsight we have today, but they had a decision to make. They had to consider three things. But there's a resurrection for us that is yet to come. Yes. But as the cross of that Good Friday, it is still relevant today. The picture or the sight, you see, it is still relevant today. Because today, it's a site of decision making. It helps determine our destination at our resurrection on the last day. So this, on day where I was in the midst of them, was already done. And I had to come back to the place where I am today and determine what is my decision of what that sight that I saw. The conversations I heard on that day, how has it turned? How has it impacted? How has it caused me to change a position? Probably like the thief. Are we going to be those who just remained condescending and condemning? Are we going to be like those who, convicted and conflicted, but convicted and being conflicted does not bring conversion always. Some people remain in that state for years and all their lifetime. But there is a decision to be made. How long will you hold between two opinions? It says in scripture, And I ask the question for those who might be convicted or conflicted. How long? Until we can join the group that was convinced, consolidated, convicted, and conflicted. So this today is the message of the cross. Where do you stand? The crowd at the cross impacted you. And what is your decision? A lot of them in the crowd, they were moved just by envy or by the chief priests and scribes who ramped them up and riled them up. Resulted in the just one and the just man, an innocent man, a man who they found no fault in. But he had his job to do. We have our job to do. What have we done with what Jesus did on Calvary's cross? So we returned, knowing that we did not always, you don't have to weep for Jesus. So that is what we could do in hindsight. And in hindsight, probably in foresight, they were weeping, but Jesus said, don't weep. So I don't want you to weep when Passion Week come for Jesus, but we need to weep for ourselves and our children. We need to engage our friends and family members and loved ones with the message of the cross. It's a powerful message. It's a salvation message. It's the point of conversion or the point of diversion. Those who want to walk away from Christ beating the chest, or those who want to come to